Good morning and welcome to the Hobby Breakfast Show. It's Onod here, and this is a sort of follow-up video to the last one we did, which was on I suppose, the state of MESBG, or whatever OT ended up calling it. But we sort of ended up talking about theme, and I sort of said I thought that this was potentially a video in and of itself, and here is that video. So this is really going to be my thoughts on why theme feels different. Not necessarily better or worse, but different. I'm going to try and sort of lay out my reasoning behind this, and hopefully it will make sense. Let's start off first of all, though, with just thinking about what were Games Workshop's intentions, and also what do we mean when we say theme. So Games Workshop had a pretty clear kind of mission statement that they posted in one of their chats on Warhammer community, and they were sort of saying that, look, in previous editions characters were fighting together that wasn't part of the lore, didn't feel like something that was therefore representing Middle Earth as they interpreted it, and that was something they're going to tackle. That was their argument. And they also then said this will also help us improve internal balance, because I think that in their minds, by removing alliances, that makes it easier to balance, which potentially is the case. So when we talk about theme, what we're really talking about, I think most of the time, I think most people, when they say, oh, I'm trying to make a thematic army, is I'm trying to make an army that is appropriate to the lore of whatever setting they are doing. So if that was a historical game, it would be you are trying to create an army that actually fought a historical battle. But in a fantasy or a sci-fi game, it's I want to create an army that actually existed in the world that I'm playing in. And that's essentially what we're talking about. Now, the reason why I thought this was a really interesting topic is because when I'm going through people's comments, looking at other videos and all that sort of thing, there seems to be sort of two opinions. One is, this is a really great addition. I've seen people commenting on Facebook going like, we've spent time discussing as a group what fantastic stuff is happening, how we can make thematic armies, and how these really capture moments that we've seen on screen and moments we've read in the books. But then the counter to that is I've also seen loads of people saying it feels less thematic. The real focus, I think, has been on, well, what about armies that aren't represented on screen? Middle Earth is quite an expansive world. Tolkien wrote thousands of years of history. I can't really represent anything other than the very narrow time period that the films focus on, and most of the books, to be fair. I can't do what if scenarios, so I can't sort of do my own versions of sort of events, and also it doesn't create a very thematic experience, because my list that represents Theoden riding out from Helm's Deep only ever fought against Uruk-hai, whilst a Rohan list fought against Uruk-hai, Mordor, Dunlending, etc. So why have people come to these two contrasting opinions about the same game? I'm hopefully going to try and explain why I think that is. But before we do that, we're going to go on a quick tangent, which will become relevant in a second. I'm going to borrow something that is used in competitive jargon, or in the way that you try and write a rule set. So from a rule writing perspective, and this is to do with game design, what's called internal balance and external balance within armies. This is something that I think people talk about a lot in maybe other games like 40k. It is discussed a little bit in Middle Earth, but maybe not as much. But anyway, very quickly, what does this mean? Internal balance is the balance within a faction or an army list. So good internal balance means that you don't have auto-include units. So if you write a list and everyone always picks the same units, so in a Minas Tirith list, if everyone always chooses Boromir over Aragorn, that is bad internal balance, because what you've done is you've created two heroes who do fairly similar things for a fairly similar points cost. And everyone who reads the rules goes, well, Boromir is much better. Whether or not that is actually true, well, that's up to debate. But anyway, a good internal balance then would be these two things are comparable, and it's up to player choice and style and how they do things like differently. Well, yeah, maybe Boromir's better at buffing, but Aragorn's better at being that kind of hero monster killer, and therefore there's a reason to take both, and therefore they're viable, and that's good internal balance. External balance then is when, and I think when most people talk about balance, they're talking about external balance. Different armies match up against each other. So that's when you're saying this Minas Tirith list is not as good as this Easterlings list. And good external balance would be to say that all lists have a reasonably equal odds of beating each other. They may be favored in certain scenarios, but when you kind of like play it out over the sequence of many games, you wouldn't find that one list just dominates over and over and over. I think that Games Workshop talk about in some of their other games aiming for this kind of between 60 to 40% win rate. I don't really know where they got this from. It might be something to do with like video games or whatever logic, for all I know, from like League of Legends or something. So tell me in the comments if you know why they kind of aim for those numbers. I get the 50% thing though, but I think in reality some lists will be skewed by the fact that more people play them, and therefore you might have newer people attract to certain lists. It's not necessarily a great indicator in my opinion, but anyway, really though, what we're noting though is that most games do not have good external balance. It's extremely difficult. It's a dice game. You have so many different variables, different factors, different player skill. One list can be dreadful in the hands of 90% of players and then amazing in the hands of the 10% who know how to use them. This is extremely, extremely difficult to get right. But those are the two different sorts of balance that we end up talking about then. So in terms of why this is then relevant for what I'm talking about, because this isn't a video about competitive stuff, what has this got to do with theme? I want to try and apply these same ideas to the concept of making things thematic or lore appropriate. So I'm going to propose that there are two different sorts of theme going on when people build a list and play a game. There's an internal theme. So your army that you have built and painted to fit the theme and the lore accurate version of that army. So if you are creating, like I was talking about earlier, Theoden's list of riding out, you have looked at the film, or maybe you've read the books and you've got those minor differences, and you said, right, film version, it's Theoden riding out with some royal guard on horse. You've got Ban of Rohan, you've got Legolas, you've got Aragorn. No Gimli because he's blowing the horn. And that's my lore accurate version of that list. And this was something that people were doing before Legendary Legions were a thing. But that is a very, very strong then internal theme. Then external theme is the thematic experience within the gameplay. So you're saying, is there a lore reason the two armies would be fighting? So Minas Tirith fighting Mordor, very, very clear reasons that they would be fighting. You can think of multiple scenarios. It doesn't have to be even a major battle, because you could say I could reasonably see these two factions fighting off screen, or not actually written in the pages. This then is, I think, where games where generic factions and that sort of thing do well with external theme, and ones where specific factions do less well there. So as an example of this, I thought that we could just quickly have a look at another game. So 40k, pretty straightforward case study. Most people are familiar with it. And I think it demonstrates sort of what I'm talking about really effectively. So for internal theme, 40k in its design, it's basically a big sandbox. Although there isn't a way to ally different factions within a faction itself, there are certain sort of rules that perhaps make you lean towards certain units over others. but you can pretty much in its current iteration take whatever you wanted. It's changed a lot since previous editions where you had a very fixed kind of, you can take this many units, etc. The interesting thing about this, of course, is that it's kind of up to the player. So they can do something which is lore accurate, or they can say, I don't care, I'm going to pursue the thing which is the most competitive, or I'm going to choose the units that I like the most. The slightly kind of different thing about 40k, though, is it's such a kind of sandbox universe that actually you could argue that most choices still maintain some kind of internal theme of a sort. It depends how sort of lore accurate you want to be. So 40k, when it comes to the external theme, does really, really well because they've designed a universe around the idea of playing a game. So there is always a situation where you can argue that their armies would fight each other. So there's never really a reason that you would look at two armies and say they have never or would never fight. Even allies can fight because they have civil wars. So putting that onto a kind of matrix, because we love charts and graphs on the channel, I'd sort of be looking and saying 40k, very, very high external theme and sort of above average internal theme in terms of how it's built and how you can do it. But there's lots of room for you to do it however you want, so you don't have to have a strong internal theme. But it's difficult really to not have a game of 40k which doesn't have external theme if you want it. If we look at Middle Earth then, so in the new edition of Middle Earth, the internal theme is very, very strong because you have to pick from the very specific sort of set menu of options that you have, and it guarantees you have a strong internal theme. So if you looked at the old edition, you would find lists like the designers described in that Warcom article that doesn't have a strong internal theme, but now you can't possibly not have one. It's interesting because someone commented in the other video that we did sort of saying you can't like not choose a narrative army. Now, I'm not sure I'd say it's quite that far, but you can kind of see where they're coming from with that. You also, though, I think in terms of because certain generals are forced on you in most lists, and then rules are encouraging you to build lists in a certain way because they buff certain units, you end up with actually quite a reduced limited choice that players have. So they're pushed even further. They're limited, and then they're pushed towards building and playing lists just one way. Very good internal theme. But when you then look at external theme, the new edition doesn't have good external theme. And I think this is where games that are based around IPs which weren't designed for a game struggle because they're not a sandbox. Tolkien's universe is enormous, but it's just not designed that way. There isn't really many reasons to justify good versus good. There's maybe more reason to justify evil versus evil, but even then it's difficult to justify. It's not as easy. And when you now have these lists that are very, very specific to these movie moments or book moments, you really only have one lore accurate opponent. And so what you end up with then is Middle Earth sitting in a very different kind of area here. It's got very high internal theme, but actually its external theme is below average. It's not got that easy kind of any army can match up against any army. And unless you are deliberately going for we're only playing good versus evil, which was kind of what the game was originally designed for, but no one really does anymore, or you go to like an event where people bring two lists, one good, one evil, even then, because there are different time sort of being represented, the Hobbit, Lord of the Rings era, or others, even then you're not guaranteed a strong external theme. So in terms of this sort of internal-external trade-off, has this increase in internal theme led to a decrease in external theme? Yes, I think. Without the generic lists, you have reduced the opportunity for those generic matchups. So it's thematic for Rohan to fight Mordor. It's less thematic for those very specific Rohan lists focused around the battle of Helm's Deep, Two-Face Mordor. So you can see there how there's a reduction. Without the what if possibilities as well, it feels more jarring. You can do a little bit of headcanon with what if scenarios to help justify things thematically, but it's more difficult now that you have such very, very specific lists. And the push really has been for players to have a more thematic looking army rather than a thematic feeling experience in sort of how I'm interpreting this. Now, you can agree or disagree with that, but I think that the rules designers very clearly wanted everyone's army to make sense as an army, but they weren't necessarily thinking about did the game when you match up against your opponent make sense. Is that a problem? No, it's not a problem. It's just different. Some people, as we've already established at the beginning of the video, prefer it. Some people don't. But essentially, if we just quick have a look here, I think that there's been a shift. So I'd put the 2018 rules as being more average with external, and then above average with internal, but not exceptional. So it kind of felt very middle of the road as a game. And for it to have such a big swing towards internal at the expense of external is why it's felt different or jarring. So there we go. Hopefully that makes sense. Any thoughts, opinions, feel free to drop down in the comments and let me know. If you think that this is a load of nonsense, let me know as well. But interesting to see whether people think with their experience in the edition, whether they agree with that or whether they think that this is a problem, or, you know, generally interesting to hear what people have to think. Right. We will see you in the next video.